This is The John Tague Show, an Actor's Odyssey and more. I am your host, John Tague. Give me a follow on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is @JohnJTague. That's @JohnJTague. Drop me a message, give me a follow. I'd love to hear from you. This episode is brought to you by the Rolling Soldier digital web series, a psychological web series about a CIA agent on the run with what is left of his team and family. Available on YouTube and Facebook. Check it out. And Rising Lotus Yoga, with yoga studios available in Sherman Oaks and Newhall, California. Let joy rise. www.risinglotusyoga.com and www.risinglotusyogascv.com. Hey everybody, what's up? It's your old pal John Tague back on the John Tague Show, and today I've got a very special guest, good friend of mine, director of the upcoming film Before the Fire, Charlie Buhler's in the house. What's up, Charlie?
Hello.
How's it going?
It's good. It's crazy that this movie's coming out in 2 weeks.
I know. We're going to get into. We'll talk about that. But I wanted to see how's everyone on your side of things with COVID and everything. Is everybody doing okay?
They're good. Yeah. Most of my family's in South Dakota, which has been less affected, luckily. And so for them, things have kind of been close to normal for this whole time. I actually went home for 3 months. I'm just getting back to LA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So basically when the virus was just breaking out, I knew that I just couldn't, I lived by myself and I just couldn't stay cooped up for that long. I would kind of go nutty. Yeah. And so I told my friend in Arizona that as soon as they made the official call that we were going under lockdown, that I was going to jump in my car and drive to Phoenix and then figure out what I was going to do from there. Wow. And so that's literally what I did. I just they put us under lockdown on a Thursday. And then by that night I was on the road to Phoenix.
Oh my God.
Stayed with them for a month. And then I'm like, okay, I gotta go. Very generously, they let me stay with them for a month. One of my best friends from college and his girlfriend.
So you're in Phoenix for a month and then you headed off to South Dakota?
And then I flew to South Dakota and I was in South Dakota for 2 months.
Wow.
And then it was time to come home. 2 months with your parents.
So you're locked down with your parents for 2 months.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. They they get to take care of you and then, do the mom and dad thing. They're probably happy to see you during.
They were so happy. I'm going home again in about a week and a half for the premiere, because the movie's actually premiering in theaters in South Dakota.
Oh, I'm so proud of you. It's so exciting.
And so I'm going to go home for the premiere of that, and they're very excited.
That's great. So let's give everybody just kind of the quick little basic rundown of who you are, the Cliff Notes. Where are you from?
I'm from South Dakota originally. Okay. I'm a director and photographer. And I've been in LA for about 10 years, hustling in every way that I can. And so this will be my first feature that's coming out, Before the Fire, which is a pandemic thriller coming out at a very strange, serendipitous time. I guess you could
super
call it.
Timely.
Very timely. Yeah. And so this will be my first long form piece that's coming out. And I met you. I started out acting in LA, and I always knew that I wanted to be a director, but for me, I knew that to be the best director that I could be, I needed to understand acting and actors and vocabulary and the process. And so I studied theater in college along with film.
Tell us where you went to college.
I went to Notre Dame.
Notre Dame?
Yeah. John's favorite.
It is.
I think that's how we actually first bonded.
Yeah. If anybody knows me, they know how big of a Notre Dame fan I am. And it's almost like I'm the kind of fan where it's kind of bad for my health, And we totally bonded over that. We were in class for a little while over at Carter Thor, studying with Alice Carter. And that's how I met you. I think and I think we hit it off, I think, over lunch one day. We were talking and you brought up Notre Dame and I was just like, I like you even more now.
That was a long time ago now.
It was. So I was just thinking about that. How long ago was that? Was it 5 or 6 years ago?
It has to be at least 6 or 7
Oh my
years ago, I
God.
think, which is insane.
Where does the time go?
I have no
It's
idea.
crazy. So when you were shooting before the fire, what year did you start shooting that?
So we shot over the course of a couple years, actually, because the movie takes place over a year. And
Yeah.
so just like logistically for that took over the course of about 2 years to do that part. But we started, I think, about 4 years ago.
Oh,
like with
man.
the first, we did like a proof of concept shoot to be able to show investors and kind of like prove that this was something that could work. Because we shot with a very, very scaled down crew. And so in order to get even our crew on board and actors on board, we knew we needed to do some sort of proof of concept. And so we shot that in LA about 4 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so let's just jump back a little bit.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to your acting at Notre Dame. So was acting a thing that you said you always wanted to be a director, but was acting also a thing that you wanted to try, or what was going on there?
It was at first. I don't think it was really, because I think I might have been even too afraid to try, because I'm not a natural performer, I would say. You know, some people, if anyone's ever been to a theater party in college, you know that there's some people who are just natural performers and like they are always performing in some way.
Always on.
In the best sort of way. I don't mean it negatively at all. Yeah. But like it's like a siren call to them. Like they just have to perform. Yeah. And for me, I've always been more of an observer. And so the idea of like getting up on stage and performing in front of people was like kind of like my worst nightmare at first. And so when I started taking theater classes in college, it sort of forced me out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways. And
what kind of what was the technique that was being taught? Was there any specific?
We kind of worked through all of the techniques. There wasn't any specific one that they stuck to. Like, you know, we did commedia, we did movement classes. You know, the deep dive into acting theory and different techniques. I think that we really don't even get in LA. Right. It's probably not as necessary for TV performers anyway, because it's meant more for theater. Yeah. But it is, I think, good to have an understanding of the process and history, especially when you're working with actors who came from the theater world.
Right.
And
were you in plays, or were you just taking the theater classes?
I did theater classes, and also because I was a film major, I also performed in like the short films of my classmates.
Oh, cool. So what was the film department like?
I think it's kind of what you make of it. You know, the wonderful thing about Notre Dame is that you have all of the resources at your fingertips in terms of, you know, grants and equipment. But when it comes to, and I think this is the same for all arts, is that you just have to make stuff to learn, you know? And so I think that the thing that I did learn that was great at Notre Dame was like film theory, film history, having like a really solid understanding of the past and of the different techniques that have happened, like, you know, throughout film history. Yeah. But when it comes to actually like the hands-on filmmaking, I mean, it's okay, but like we learned on Final Cut, which is irrelevant now because no one uses Final Cut anymore. And the equipment that we use, no one uses anymore. And so I think, but what we did learn is how to make stuff out of nothing, you know, and how to be self-motivated. And I think that is something that I will always carry with me. And I think that's true of any film program you go to, you know, because it's just like,
you take what you get from it, you know, it's you know, you learn with what you got, and you know, and then it translates later on into, you know, what other platform you decide to use, or equipment or whatever. You know, once you have an idea of how to use the equipment, you know, it's pretty easy to, you know, transfer that over to whatever the newest technology is, or whatever. So then you graduate from Notre Dame, and then where'd you end up? Did you just come right out to LA?
I came straight to LA. Yeah, like literally packed my bags, and because I'm from South Dakota, and so in South Dakota, filmmaking is sort of like Oz. You know, it's like not something that people even really think of as a real job that you can have. Yeah. And so I knew straight away that I couldn't stay in South Dakota. And really you can't, some people try to, stay in the Midwest in some capacity, like maybe go to Chicago or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a firm believer that you have to do your time in LA at some point. Like even, I think it's even hard, like with New York, like some people are like New York or LA. And I really think that if you do some time in LA, then you can make New York very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of have to be here at some point.
Yeah.
And so I graduated, packed my bags, and drove out here almost immediately. And then I didn't know anything about LA. So I like literally looked at a map.
Did you have any friends out here or anybody to help you out?
Not really, no.
Yeah, me too. I didn't have anybody.
I didn't know anybody. And so I had an ex-boyfriend at the time who was from LA, but he was going to law school somewhere else. And so his family was here in case something went wrong, but it like wasn't a social circle that I had.
Right.
And so I was looking at a map trying to figure out where I wanted to live. And I saw a place called Studio City. And I was like, oh, well, that must be where its movies are made. So I get to live in Studio City. And that's literally how I decided it. It seemed like a place where studios were. And like, thank God I didn't choose to live in Hollywood for my first introduction. That would have been.
That's what happened to me. I ended up moving right into Hollywood on Martel between Fountain and Sunset. And it was complete culture shock coming from New York City. Where you're able to walk around and you walk everywhere in New York, to not being able to walk anywhere was a big.
Hollywood's rough. Like I worked
back then. It was rough. I mean, I came over in 2001, and yeah, it wasn't the nicest place.
It's still like, so I worked at Cabo Cantina.
Oh yeah.
In Hollywood, on Hollywood and Highland.
Uh-huh.
And I always say like that was my introduction to the world. Yeah. Like I saw more things in like that 1 year I worked at Cabo Cantina than I think I will ever see in a lifetime, because it's just kind of like chaos is drawn to that place, and it's in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I moved to Studio City. Carter Thor was in Studio City.
Yeah.
I got a commercial agent kind of randomly and easily, actually. I was lucky right when I first moved. And so I was kind of swept into the commercial world, which helped pay some bills when I was first starting.
So you booked some commercials? Yeah,
I booked a couple commercials when I first started.
Nationals, like union nationals?
It was not union. It was like a lot of print stuff. So like Samsung, like in-store stuff. Sure. Mm-hmm. I had this one thing that kept running. So they kept like every year I'd get like a new notification that they wanted to like renew
re-up it. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that was nice, because it was just like money that kind of randomly came in.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wasn't as successful as there's some people who just make a full on living.
Right.
Like,
career out of being a commercial actor.
I wasn't that person.
Yeah.
But that was the thing that sort of pushed me into the idea of like acting or being on camera as a job.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. And so I joined Carter Thor, and that's also where my first friends were, because because when you're in class, like I was taking like at least 2 classes a week. I had the on-camera class, and then also the class with Alice. And so
I met you in Alice's class. It was a regular just scene study class.
It was scene study, which I did with Alice for years.
Yeah.
And that became where my best friends were. And we also started making stuff on the side together. You know, like we would do Katie Stevens, who's now doing so well. Yeah. But she's also a singer. And so I did, I would make little music videos for her in my living room. And we were just kind of like scraping by, like shooting each other's self-tapes, making little short films. And, they were like crappy and I would never show anyone, but it was how I learned how to edit. It's how I learned how to tell stories. It's how, I think when you're an artist, you're sort of drawn to create, even if it's not for anything. It's just you can't just wait for someone to give you a job before you start making stuff.
No, you got to hustle. And what was nice about that, I mean, Katie was in class when I was there too, and that was a nice group of people in that class. There were some really talented people that have gone off to do some really great things, and it was a good group. And it was nice for me because I had taken about 5 years off, and I jumped into that class to kind of brush off the rust. And yeah, it was great. I loved being in class with you guys. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was Katie and Chloe Bennett was in the
Yep.
class.
Who's on Agents of Shield, and who else? Elisa Alapak was in
Lisa,
there.
and Alden was at the studio at the time.
Right, that's right.
Colin Egglesfield.
Yep.
That's how it was there. I was in Cameron's class with Colin. But like, you know, very, very talented people who've gone on to do very cool things. And it was fun to, you know, to have access to all that talent, you know, as a director, to be able to learn and be in scenes with people who are just so great at what they do. And I kind of feel like LA is just like that, you know, like it's not, there's people who could win Oscars who are like working at Trader Joe's right now.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so it's just, there's talent everywhere you go, and it's about mining talent and having good taste.
Yes.
And luckily when we were at Carter Thor, not only were they just like dear friends, but also like supremely talented actors who, you know, like Jackson Davis is in my movie, and I met him.
He was in class with us too.
In class, and that was just because I knew Jackson could hang.
Yeah.
You know, I knew that he could drop everything and fly to South Dakota with us and be in the freezing cold. And we always used to call him One Take Jackson, or Jackson One Take Davis, because he was just always good. He's just always good and always on.
Yeah, he's a great actor.
And he'll give you something new every single time, but you just believe him every time he does something. And he's a friend. And so he slept on my parents' couch and was with us, you know, at a drop of a hat anytime we needed him. And that's how these movies get made.
Yeah, that's how you got to do things, especially, you know, when you're young and in Hollywood and you're trying to, you know, do something of your own and create your own content. You got to look around and see what you got. And if you've got the right people around you, you just use them.
I know you did the same with Rolling Soldier.
Yeah. I mean, and everybody that was in that, except for maybe one or two people, were all from Carter Thor. And you know, maybe this happened with you. I don't know how much of the writing you did for Before the Fire, but when I was writing The Rolling Soldier, I made sure that I wrote to everybody's strengths. And that's kind of, I think, why it turned out as good as it did. I didn't I knew the actors so well that I just was like, I'm just going to write to what, you know, for what you're good at and let you do your thing. Yeah, like we were saying, you know, it's important just to always write to the strengths of the people around you, or play up to their strengths. I think that's super important. So,
and I think it's also using the resources you have, right? And so it's like writing for, not only writing for the actors that you have and playing up their strengths, but choosing those, but writing the entire character around those people, you know, like, so for us, it was like, okay, we had Jackson, and then we kind of casted around that. And I knew I had Jenna, so we casted around that. And we built the whole movie by using like resources we had access to for free. And so shooting in South Dakota, was decided because I knew I had a farm there. And I knew that if we took it home to South Dakota, then we could get like all of these spaces that would have been way too expensive to have in LA. And so it was like reverse engineering a script around those sorts of set pieces, which I think was key for us.
Right.
As opposed to like waiting to be able to afford things. We're like, what do we have already?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And like, let's do something based upon that.
Were you, did you have to get permits and all that kind of thing? And
no, there's no permits in South Dakota at all.
Wow.
And so
you just,
you can just do whatever you
Right. I mean,
want.
I imagine they just leave you alone. Because, you know, running around shooting The Rolling Soldier in Los Angeles, we didn't have permits either, and we were sweating it.
Yeah.
We thought any moment we were all going to get arrested because we're running around with guns and stuff. It was this is fucking silly.
I'm sure that happens a lot. I'm happy no one's gotten killed that way. Like,
oh
just
my
shooting a short
God.
film with guns. We stole a shot at LAX. So there's this one scene where like their flight gets canceled at LAX. And so what we did was we kept the camera in the car, and we had the actors get out of the car and do the scene. Like they get out, they open the back of the car, the camera turns with them. Jackson's character runs into the airport, runs back out, and the whole scene takes place with the actors sort of moving, but the camera staying still. And that was our way of getting around like not being able to take the camera out of the car. And we were sweating that, but we were like, okay, well, as long as the camera stays in the car, you know, maybe they can't be mad at us.
But you got to do, you got to do what you got to do. And that's clever, you know? And I've seen that shot, and that shot works really well.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about you as a filmmaker. What directors who do you like? Who are your directors? Like, who really makes it happen for you?
That's a good question. I love Inarritu. I love Sofia Coppola. I'm always inspired by actors who have been able to, or directors who've been able to accomplish a lot with just a little. So like Gareth, if you've ever seen Gareth Edwards' first movie, Monsters, was one of the movies that like really inspired Before the Fire, because he made that movie where they just stole a bunch of shots in Mexico. They used actors, besides the two main actors, everyone else is just people that they met along the way. Wow. And then they inserted the special effects afterwards. And so he made this incredible movie for like $15,000. And he just did it. Yeah. And so in like his first movie was Monsters, and I think his second movie was Godzilla. Yeah. Which is a trajectory I think that only happens for white guys. But right.
And then he ended up doing Rogue One. Yeah, he did Rogue One, which I think is one of the best Star Wars films.
Yeah, and those are his 3 movies. Yeah, I think
that's amazing. Else on the so he was an influence. Who else was doing it for you?
And then like the crew that did Another Earth and Sound of My Voice.
Oh, that's Britt Marling, right?
Yeah, Britt Marling, and then I think it's Zal Betmiji and I can't remember who the guy is, but there's 2 directors that did the other 2 movies, but they were like a crew that just again made movies using the resources that they had. And not waiting to have permission to make something, and also making something really unique and interesting and cool, you know, outside of the studio system. Right. And so I've always been very, very inspired by people who do stuff like that. And you know, of course, like Scorsese and the classic greats, I'm also really inspired by. But in terms of like people who I've taken like practical inspiration for, it's those guys, because I'm like, okay, well, if they could do it, how can I do something like that? Right. And we really read every single interview that any of them did after that period, so I could just like pull anything I could in terms of in terms of strategy to be able to get Before the Fire made.
Right on. So now let's talk a little bit about Before the Fire. Now let's kind of jump in. When did the idea start to germinate with you to tell the story, and how did that come about? Did you come up with the idea, or did Jenna wrote it, right?
Jenna wrote it. We came up with the idea together. Oh. And it basically started, we had done a short film together, which was the thing that really got me like got the ball rolling for me as a director, in terms of like me being like, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. Like I knew I did, but now I really know. Right. And we casted that the traditional way. We did a Kickstarter, raised $25,000.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, it was a really big learning experience to raise that money for that. And then it's
not easy, man. Doing Kickstarters is not easy. I mean, you're literally taking a month of your life, and that's all you're doing. I hate it.
I don't necessarily recommend it, but now I'll explain why. I don't recommend Kickstarter, but it was, at the time, it was like peak Kickstarter, like 2012 maybe, when everyone was Kickstartering at that moment. And so we cast Jenna like through the traditional casting process. We like rented a space, did auditions. And then I didn't realize that she was also a writer. And so it was great working with her as an actress. She's a wonderful actress. And then
so just so we're clear, we're talking about Jenna Ling Adams.
Yeah. So Jenna Ling Adams,
fantastic actress.
Yes. Jenna Ling Adams, who is now on the Kominsky Method, a wonderful actress. And so afterwards, we had finally wrapped everything up, and she was like, I loved working with you. I have a script I wrote, and I would love for a woman director to direct it. Would you read it for me? So I had no idea like what to expect in terms of genre or style, but I was like, sure, yeah, let me read it. And I read it and it was really cool. It was like this. So when you first started reading it, it felt like it was taking place in the 1800s. Like, you know, like it was like kind of, you know, there's trains, but not much technology beyond that. Everything was like steam powered, no electricity. And so you think it's the 1800s. And then about 20 minutes in, the main character goes into this like abandoned house and there's TVs on the wall that are like dilapidated, like old TVs. And you realize, oh no, this is some sort of like post-apocalyptic future. And it's not about the apocalypse at all. It's just these people who are living in this, this like past, what feels like a past world.
Right.
But it's about this girl who's trying to find her boyfriend. Like that's the story, but it's in this heightened world. And I loved it. And I was like, I would love to make this movie with you. And we can develop it and hope that someday someone might give us the $8 million required to make it, having done nothing.
Right.
Or we can make something in the meantime using resources that we know that we have access to, make something that's in a similarly heightened world, but it's smaller in scale. And it won't feel smaller, but just things that we know that we can do right away. And we'll use that as a proof of concept to be able to do other things in the future. And so she was like, great, yes, I'm on board. And so that's how it started. It was just like us recognizing the fact that no one would let us make the films that we wanted to make unless we proved ourselves by making the first things ourselves, you know, by just
love
doing
it. I love it.
And so, and that's how it started. So we were just like, okay, well, I know I have a farm. I know we have, you know, the lead is Jenna. It's okay. That's it. That's that. We know we have Jackson Davis, so that he's the boyfriend. Who now we need to cast a brother that looks like Jackson. I know my dad's like a hobby pilot, and a lot of his friends are hobby pilots in South Dakota. So I knew that we could get like small airplanes, and I knew that we could have access to the airport there. So we're like, cool, let's write that in. My grandpa had this old house that he needed in South Dakota. When you wanted to destroy buildings, you just burn them down.
Amazing.
Because it's much easier than like getting all the equipment and like tearing it down and then disposing of everything. It's just like, you just burn it and then that's that. And so my grandpa had this old house that he needed to burn down. And so I was like, wait, grandpa, like that's going to go in the movie. So we added,
don't burn it yet.
Don't burn it yet. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Like, don't burn it yet. Wait for us to get there. And literally we have this giant burning house scene and it only exists because on a very practical level, like my grandpa had to burn the house down anyway. And so we were like helping him.
But what an amazing thing to have in your film. I mean, just unbelievable.
And it's so beautiful.
I think when maybe early on, I think when you were shooting, I think you might have posted something on Instagram or Facebook or something at the time. And I remember seeing it and I remember saying to myself, I've got to be in this movie. So I think I wrote you an email and I was like, if you need me, I would love to be a part.
And your voice is all over our movie too. It's so funny. Like you're like every radio.
Good. Awesome.
But that only happened because that's what we had. And something that I'm a firm believer in is that everyone has some version of that. Like for me, it's South Dakota and farm life, but you know, like Dakota, one of our main actors, his parents own a zoo. And so I'm like, Dakota's movie would take place in a zoo. Like that's what he would do. And so I think that it feels really big because if we didn't have access to it, we cut it. You know, if we couldn't pull it off, we cut it. And also there's so much in our movie that is on the cutting room floor. And it's like, there's so many darlings that are dead.
Yeah. But that happens, you know, that has to happen.
It happens. And I think with ours,
that's a luxury having that much footage.
It especially happened because it was figuring out the story, figuring out what was working and not working. And, you know, the edit took a really long time to get right. But I think like the key was leaning into the things that we knew we could do.
Right.
And again, building a story around that. And that's how the virus started. Was we knew that we wanted to create this post-apocalyptic world. And we were like, well, what sort of thing could cause worldwide chaos and cheap? And we're like, oh, a virus is invisible, you know, and it slowly creeps in in a way that you feel, but you can't see.
Right.
And I think we're learning that very acutely right now.
Did you have to do any research on pandemics at all? Like, were you, I mean, you're super smart, and I know that you wouldn't come in unprepared. I'm sure you did a bunch of research. Is there anything that stuck out to you when you were doing your research?
Well, my best friend from college actually worked for the CDC, and she was on the Ebola task force. And so, like, as we were shooting, she was actually in Africa working on Ebola. And so I talked to her a lot about like what sort of things they would do. And so, like, one thing we do in our movie is like take people's temperatures before they enter different spaces, which is something that she said that like they would do, is make sure that no one's running fevers. Quarantining cities is something that happens in our movie, and that's something that she said that they would likely do, is like try to stop like movement between places to stop the spread of the virus. One thing that we started to see, and I wonder if we'll start to see it more, is that infrastructure, like things that have nothing to do with the virus, starts to crumble too, because like we take for granted that if we shut down transportation, then like all of the truckers can't move freely anymore. That's and gas prices are affected. And so that was all stuff that I talked to her a lot about, is what the CDC would envision could become issues. The thing is, our world had never dealt with a pandemic in like the modern era in this way. Like the last one was 1916.
Right, the Spanish flu.
Yeah, and we didn't have the same sort of technologies. And so one thing that we could never have predicted is like the pandemic in the time of Trump. And how that would play out. Like that has been really...
It's unbelievable. I mean, the luck.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's look, let's be honest. It's kind of bittersweet because it's caused so much misery and death right now, but it's really uncanny how your story is happening right at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, even down to her going home to South Dakota, which is what I did. And that just, we were like, well, what would force someone who never wants to go home and live on a farm with your family? And I was like, the safest place to be would likely be in isolation in South Dakota, where there's few people. And when you're on a farm, you're sort of like on an island away from everything else. And that's literally what I did. Like when the pandemic broke out, I did go home to South Dakota. And I think it's been strange, because I feel like I've been thinking about pandemics for years now. Like I've been like living and breathing them for almost 4 years. And then we finally had our world premiere at CineQuest. And the day after our world premiere, that's when everything was going under lockdown. So they literally ended the festival. Like our festival ended early because of the pandemic. Yeah. And I was like, it felt like I released it. I was like releasing my movie into the world, but at the same time, it's like as the pandemic was like really being released in the United States. And
it gave it some juice too.
It did.
Because it was like paralleling what's happening right now. And people were like, this is very, really, first of all, it's a great film. I remember when I saw the rough cut, I was like, holy shit, this is the rough cut? This is amazing. This is fantastic. And so I would imagine when you were at CineQuest that, all the parallels that are happening at the same time, people must have just been jumping at it.
I will say the pandemic has definitely helped contextualize the movie.
Right.
As before, it was like a really fun thriller, post-apocalyptic thriller, but it wasn't anything that anyone had a direct connection to. It was almost like as real as the idea of zombies to everyone.
Sure.
Because pandemics just don't happen and haven't happened for a really long time. And so, but when the pandemic broke out, then all of a sudden it went from like being a sci-fi movie to being like reality.
Topical.
Topical, exactly. And so that was the difference. It's like it was sci-fi in some sort of like alternate universe. And now it was very much, it felt like a topical movie of our time.
Right.
And, more like a drama than anything.
Right.
And so we got attention from places that probably wouldn't have noticed us otherwise, because, we don't we don't have like major stars in the movie. We have people that have worked a lot and are extremely talented, but in an industry that really demands and needs recognizable faces in order to advertise their films. We didn't have that, and the pandemic sort of took the place of the pandemic became the star, and the pandemic became the angle in which they could advertise the movie.
Right,
and
it's
so
like the hook.
Yeah, that became the hook, and it became a, Contagion was doing really well. Outbreak was doing really well. Every pandemic themed anything was trending on Netflix. And so they knew it was sort of a proven model to be able to make money. And so I feel like we had a much more leverage trying to sell our movie at the time that we were selling it than we would have if we sold it a year ago. For sure.
And it's interesting too, because the film, like the pandemic is an important part of the film, but it's more like the backdrop of the film. The film itself is really more about Jenna's character and what she's going through and domestic abuse and all those things. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. How did you approach that kind of material, and what was it about it that made you what was it that kind of gave you that impetus to tell this story?
I really wanted to make a movie about a flawed woman finding her strength, and a woman facing her trauma head on without needing like a man to save her. And so that was kind of the thing that really drew me to this story, and something that I knew that Jenna could handle, because she's just so good in quiet moments, and her performances have so much depth to them. And so, as a woman who left my home and came to LA, and essentially like your life, the life that you left behind is so different from the life that you take on living here. And, you carry both of those sides with you. And so I was really interested in, obviously I didn't flee my home in the same way that Jenna's character did, but I was interested in this idea of like your past being so different from your present, in a path that people might not necessarily even like imagine that you had lived. Like I grew up in Trump land, and a lot of my family are Trump supporters, and I grew up in a very evangelical household, and just the life I lived back then is so different from the life that I live now, and I've had to overcome a lot of that programming. Like you're taught, especially I think in Christianity, or people who are particularly evangelical, you're taught to follow and to think or be led by like blind faith, as
right, and not question anything.
Yeah. And the status quo is kind of like held up as like the ultimate way that the world should look like, and so I felt like it took a lot for me to be able to come into my own, coming from that, because you're taught like you're not supposed to be your own person at all.
Sure.
And independent thinking is actually like you're not supposed to think that way. And so so like that idea of a woman like having to go back and face that past and being forced to and find her strength in that was something that I was really interested in exploring.
Well, I mean, it's such a brave story. You follow that character, and you kind of dread it when I don't want to give any of the movie away. Without if I do, we'll cut it.
It's okay.
But her journey, you can feel this sense of dread that is seeping in. You've got the dread of the pandemic, but then you've got this other completely different thing that she's fighting against, and she has to jump into that world again. And I thought it was just a really interesting, I I guess the word, I don't know, juxtaposition of how you've got those two forces kind of happening at the same time and how she's navigating through it. It just makes really good conflict and really good filmmaking. And it's shot so beautifully. I can't wait for people to see it because it's so beautifully shot, and the acting's fantastic. You know, both Jenna and Jackson really just are so good in it, and you know, it's such a good film, and I think people are really going to enjoy it. So now you've got this film. What's the plan now? So it's coming out on all streaming services, or only a couple?
So it's coming out on all streaming services August 14th, and then in tandem with that, we're also doing a limited theatrical release in the Midwest. Awesome. So South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, because theaters are open there, and so and drive-ins are very big and popular there as well.
That's cool.
I think will be really fun.
Yeah.
So
how many screens? How many screens is it going to be on? Do you know?
I'm not sure. Probably 30.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're still kind of working that out, but
30 screens. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So just like because the thing about South Dakota too is that people are so excited to see themselves or a version of their world on. And that's something that I never saw when I was a kid. It's like I never heard South Dakota mentioned. No one ever shot movies there. And so I felt so left out. You know, like I said, movie making felt like Oz, because besides like Dances with Wolves, there was, and it was like the Dakota Territory where Dances with Wolves takes place, but there was just no movies that were like centered in South Dakota where they named us.
Right.
And so the local enthusiasm has just been so strong. And I think that sometimes Hollywood underestimates the Midwest in that way.
Oh, totally.
They underestimate like how much. My grandma used to always say, like, my money is just as green as anyone else's.
That's
so
true.
I think it's so true. You know, it's like people in South Dakota they know that this movie exists, and there's been on like the local news and for the last few years. And so there's been so much momentum. And so mostly all of these theaters reached out to me asking if they could screen the movie.
Incredible.
And so,
but now you have to work with all these, you know, distribution guys, right? And what's that been like for you?
It's been great. And so actually they let me, so we signed with MPI in Dark Sky, and they have worldwide distribution rights, but they allowed me to keep South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming. And so I'm self-distributing there, and they're doing everything else. And so, which has been great, because then it's, you know, so then I can use the relationships that I have to give this movie, you know, life in ways that I think people wouldn't have, you know, if you're not from South Dakota, I don't think you would have imagined what the possibilities are. And so, so then I've been using the connections that I have, or people who have reached out to me, in order to get it in the local theaters. And, you know, because so many people in South Dakota want to see a movie shot in South Dakota, then it kind of becomes like the advertising becomes kind of simple as long as people know that it's there. And are starving for movies because they can finally go to see movies again in theaters.
And you're going to go out for the premiere?
Yeah, so I'm going to go out for, I think, 2 weeks, and just kind of do a little tour and do.
Be like the conquering hero coming back. It's amazing.
It'll be fun because
local kid makes good, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think South Dakota is just gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
So beautiful, and like there's no sunsets on Earth like there's sunsets in South Dakota, and so and it's
like
also
thunderstorms and things like that too.
Thunderstorms. There's a brutal tornado in our movie. Like there was a storm. We cut this shot, but like there was one shot that I loved. It just didn't work. Where like you see a tornado in the back of the scene, and it's just gorgeous. And there's wide open spaces. It's easy to shoot.
Yeah.
I hope that Hollywood kind of jumps on it and realizes how.
You might have to be like the spokesperson for that, and they might have to give you more money to make more films.
I would. I need to just figure out how to get the tax breaks that they get.
Was that did they give you a pretty good deal?
Well, our movie wasn't that expensive. So
right. But do they have?
They don't have tax breaks, which I think is that's the major hurdle. But the way that it could potentially infuse money into the local economy, because like there's so many truckers and electricians, and there's lots of local people who could do jobs on set. And I think it could, if you created some sort of filmmaking infrastructure, it could help prevent the brain drain that is happening with young people in South Dakota right now, because it doesn't feel like there's as many exciting opportunities locally as there are other places. And so like you could retain that. You keep those small towns and restaurants moving if you had crews coming in often. So I think there's definitely a case to be made to fight for that. Maybe I'll have to do it if I have time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's next for you? Do you have anything lined up? Are you working on anything at the moment?
Yeah, well, so I just finally got an agent as a director, which makes me very happy.
That is spectacular. Congratulations.
I just signed with Verve, and my team is wonderful.
Wow.
And so I'm kind of figuring out, I just shot a mini doc about these 3 Native American rappers on the reservation in South Dakota, on Pine Ridge and Rosebud reservations, which if you know Standing Rock, it's like Standing Rock is like one of 5 Lakota tribes in the area, but they're all part of the same like Lakota nation. But Pine Ridge and Rosebud are like the poorest counties in the country. And they're also, they are some of the only reservations that are autonomous. And so they like, it's not like when you're driving through a reservation and you like don't even really realize you're on one. Like Pine Ridge is very isolated. It's like this island in the middle of a prairie. And it's 99% Lakota, and hip hop culture. And I would say Black culture in general has very much been, I don't want to say appropriated because I don't want it to sound negative, but like adopted as a part of Lakota culture in a very beautiful way. And so when you step onto Pine Ridge, it feels like a different world. And there's some like amazing musicians and amazing rappers there. And so I did this mini doc on these 3 guys as they try to like make it in the hip hop world, but also like having a dream in a place where dreaming feels impossible.
Is it released? Is there someplace we can see it, or is it still?
It's not out yet. It's finished, but not out yet. So we're trying to figure out what its next steps are going to be.
Yeah. Well,
but I eventually want to make that into something more long form, and so that's my next project.
No, I think that's great. I mean, those kind of stories need to be told. We don't get enough of those stories.
Yeah, it's my home, so I feel like as a person of color, I feel like there's this expectation of what sort of stories people of color are supposed to tell.
Right.
I mean, there's this idea that if you're Black, then you come from like a very urban environment. And the reason why that is because the people who are greenlighting these projects are oftentimes not from those communities. Right. And they're like, okay, well, Black people come from Chicago or Compton, and that's the only thing that we're going to go for. But in reality, like the Black experience is wherever Black people are. Right. And so like my Black experience is very rural. It's in South Dakota. There's so many brown people and like so many Native Americans in South Dakota as well who have lived similar experiences there. And so I feel like that's the story that I'm like most able to tell.
They're underrepresented.
Yeah.
I just watched I can't remember what it was. It was a pretty good, I can't remember what show it was, but it was about Black farmers and how there used to be a huge Black farming community, and like whole towns were based around it, and it's just been kind of stripped away from them over the years because of banking loans and things like that. And it was a pretty interesting story. But yeah, I mean, hearing that kind of point of view from unexpected places, is interesting, and I think there's an audience for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like when you think about Black farmers, it's like, well, the original job that Black people had in this country was working on farms. Yeah. You know what I mean? Or like even after they gained their freedom, like my great grandpa, after he was born a slave and then became a sharecropper in Arkansas. And so there were so many Black farmers, but they were sharecropping and they didn't own their own land, which became very predatory. And then eventually during the Great Migration moved north to cities. But originally they were in rural areas, in the South. And so I think like that makes total sense that there's Black cowboys, Black people in the South, Black farmers. I've done a lot of work with the Compton Cowboys, which I
really?
I love those guys.
Super cool.
And I'm just drawn to like that contradiction, like the thing that you don't quite expect, so rappers in South Dakota, cowboys in Compton, which once you get to know them, it makes total sense.
Right. And seeing that kind of contrast is, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
I love stuff like that. So I can't wait to see that. That's going to be really cool. Let me ask you this. So how, not only being a person of color, but, also being a woman, and you're kind of blazing a trail here with Before the Fire. Are you interested in telling more stories from that point of view, or are you open to doing other things? What's going on there?
I'm open to doing anything really, if it's interesting and I think it's true and real. I definitely feel drawn to telling stories with women protagonists, because I feel like, people say like, write what you know, tell the stories that you know, because that's the thing that you're going to be able to do that's most unique and interesting. And so as a woman, there's nothing, no experience I know better than the female experience. And so I would be open to doing anything, but I think likely I will often have women protagonists, or tell female stories, because like, one, just from like women are half the population, and so like from like a money standpoint, it makes just as much sense to tell a story with like a woman at the helm than it does a man at the helm. It's like 50-50. So, and also women are oftentimes the women people who are choosing what they're going to watch.
That's true. That's very true.
And so I think
I get no say at all in what goes on in this house when it comes to watching television. My wife and daughter are always in charge of the content that we watch here, so I'm always just kind of, I have to take the back seat. I don't mind though. They always pick good stuff though.
And the old guard has shown like that women action movies can be, women leading action movies are fun and interesting.
Oh, totally.
And great. And so I think that Hollywood is open to and realizing that the numbers are pushing towards having more women at, leading films.
I think it's great.
So I hope to continue doing that.
Yeah. Well, listen, Charlie, we're coming up on an hour here.
This was so fun.
I'm so glad that you got to come on. I really want to help get the film out and, help you help get the word out. And you've been a good friend. If some of you who follow me on social media might have seen some of the pictures that Charlie took of me. She actually did headshot session of me not too long ago, a couple of years ago. And I
feel like I've done like all of my friends' headshots at some point.
Yeah. And Gino Jackson took my headshots once also, which is really funny.
He's a great photographer.
Yeah, he's good too.
Right.
But I want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you. What's the best way to follow you on social media? Let's get the handles for Before the Fire, and also your personal handle if you're interested in giving that kind of thing out.
So Before the Fire, @BeforeTheFire_ is Instagram, or also Before the Fire Movie on Twitter and Facebook. And then my personal one is Charlie Buhler. So just my name. And
cool.
If you want to know like what's going on at the movie, just follow those and there'll be tons of updates, I'm sure.
So I'll make sure I put all that in the show notes for you. And I wish you nothing but the best. And I'm super proud of you.
Hopefully there'll be much more that we can.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime you need me, I'm there. And
I do.
let's hope. I don't know. Do you think Notre Dame's going to play this year?
No, I don't know.
I have a bad feeling.
I think with kids, like, it's one thing to have adults play, professional, but kids who aren't getting paid, I think it's really hard to make that case.
Boy, that's going to be hard for the ND crowd to hear that.
Well, and I've heard that, so they're starting school early this year.
Yeah.
And they're not doing fall break because they want, in anticipation of the second wave, which who knows like how that's going to work out, but like, because they're anticipating that maybe they won't come back in the spring, they want to get this one semester done. And so I think everything is very up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I hope everyone's, looking out for the best interests of the students,
Yeah,
Um,
it's kids who are living in such, again, like with professional sports, you cannot have a crowd,
right.
or you can have like people are separated, but these kids live together in
Yeah.
dorm. So I think
Yeah.
it's just that would be a mess.
Yeah. Because
With
the
one person.
players at Notre Dame, they all live on campus, I think, for the most part,
They
right?
for the first 2 years they live on campus.
Right. I never went to Notre Dame. I'm a Subway alumni fan who thinks he knows everything.
Our best fans are.
I know, but sometimes they're not the best fans. Sometimes they're the absolute worst.
You're a
But
good
anyway,
fan.
thanks. Anyway, but yeah, I wanted to thank you again for coming on, and
Thank you.
best of luck. I'm totally pulling for you. I'm going to help you get the word out, and please go and follow Charlie and follow Before the Fire, and keep an eye out for her because she's going to make waves in this strange little industry that we have. All right, Charlie.
Sounds good, John. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. I'll talk later.
Okay, bye.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, go ahead and hit subscribe. Also, give me a follow on Instagram at JOHNJTAGUE and on Twitter, same handle at JOHNJTAGUE. See you next time.